Um, First of all, I always love a challenge, and I think we have a multi-layered challenge here today. Number one, I'm not speaking your language, so please forgive me for my lack of Portuguese. I do speak a native English because I was born and raised in California. I mean, we speak a form of English out there. I've lived the last 30 years of my life in Israel. Second challenge is that I had to get up about 2 o'clock in the morning last night to get here for this speech, so I'm without much sleep. And the third challenge is I was expecting to give you my standard Israel pitch about what tech is like in Israel and the venture capital community, but that's going to happen tomorrow. Okay, so you're all invited back tomorrow to the Audax conference, where I'll be happy to tell you what the secret sauce is in the Israeli entrepreneurial community. But what I'm doing today is a more or less impromptu talk of advice. And I find advice very scary. That's a scary thing. If you ever read Shakespeare, Hamlet, there's this guy Polonius, okay, who's an old fart, excuse me. He's just an old, full of hot air, okay, and he gives advice. And I've always felt that advice, I'm not implying anything negative about, teaching. Teaching is not advice, but advice is sort of a scary thing. But, I've been asked to do it, so I'm going to try to give you a little bit of advice in terms of how to pitch your ventures and what's things to watch out for and some good rules. But before I do, you have to know who I am, okay, and where my story comes from. So I grew up in a typical California family. I was born in 1955, a baby boomer. I was a very political kid, very active in the anti-war movement, worked for Bobby Kennedy, for Gene McCarthy, if you know what that was about, back in the 60s. Went to a school called the University of California at Berkeley, which was a great technology school, except I never stepped foot once into a class in math or in physics or in chemistry or in business. All I wanted to study was history, because I loved history and I loved politics. And after my freshman year of college, it was 1973, sort of the end of the 60s, I wanted to go broaden my horizon and spend a summer somewhere abroad. And I went to my parents and I said, Mom and Dad, I was a part of a middle class or upper middle class family. I said, where can I go spend a year, or at least 3 or 4 months to get some seasoning? And they said, there's only one place we're going to pay for you. If you want to go somewhere else, go make some money, but if you want to get paid for, you got to go to, Israel. Because my parents, my mom was a refugee from Germany from the Holocaust. My father, a son of refugees from Russia who came before the Holocaust. And they were very strongly Jewish, even though we weren't particularly religious. And they said, if you want to go somewhere, you go to the Jewish homeland, go visit Israel. So I went off to Israel in 1973 as a young college student. I was 18 years old. Absolutely fell in love with the country. Went back to Berkeley. And then about 8 days later, the war broke out in 1973. And all of a sudden, people who I had met were fighting and dying. And that's what really hit me. It was the up and the down together. And I kept on going back to Israel every summer in college, taught myself Hebrew, and ended up moving to Israel. And had decided that I would teach history. That was going to be my profession. And in 1982, after 2 years of living in Israel and teaching an informal educational, all I have is a BA in history. I didn't continue my proper studies, but I was teaching in a bunch of sort of informal educational opportunities. My father shows up to see how his son is doing in the Holy Land. And my father was a physicist. My late father, he passed away about a year ago. He was actually a serial entrepreneur. He had been involved in a couple of very early startups. His first startup was bought by Xerox. His second startup he was just building at that time. And he showed up and he said, look, in America, taxes like they are here are a problem, and you always look for what's called a write-off. And he said, I want to turn this trip into a business trip so I can write it off on my taxes. I can say this now because he's dead and the IRS isn't going to care, okay? And he said, look, I've got to have at least one business meeting, so it's not cheating. Okay, so I know some guys who are working up in a defense establishment, and maybe they'll be interested in what I'm doing. He was doing something which nobody knew anything about in 1982 called fiber optics, okay? And he was a pioneer in fiber optics. And he said, you'll come with me, you'll drive me up to north of Haifa in the north of Israel, about a 2-hour drive, we'll have a good day, and you'll come with me to this meeting. So I went up with my dad, and we sat with these scientists, and they began to speak Chinese, okay? I mean, not Chinese literally, but they were talking about signal-to-noise ratio and field of view and all kinds of advanced optical terminology, which I had not a clue of what they were talking about. I sat there, and I was, twiddling my thumbs and bored to tears. And finally, at the end of this 2-hour meeting, one of these guys looks at me and says, well, what do you do, Jonathan? I said, well, I sort of lecture about history. And he says, what a waste. I said, what? Sorry, history is important. It's passion. It's where we come from. And he goes, no. What your dad is doing now, this is important. This is what the country needs. Go help your father. And so in the car on the way home from this little meeting, I said, Dad, what do you do? What is this fiber optic stuff? And he says, son, it starts with Ohm's law. And he began to teach me. I got a 2-hour lesson on the car home. And after a couple of days of talking about this, he said, look, I'll give you $100 a month, which for me was a lot of money back in those days. If you help me find some, other guys like these guys, maybe they'll buy some stuff. Because my father had a company with 9 people, had no money, hadn't raised anything, had $50,000 loan from called the Small Business Administration, the SBA in America. And that's how he had started. But he was doing contract research. He would book a contract, someone would say, build something, Dave, and he would build it, and then he would pay and grow that way. But it was all bootstrap. He said, if I can afford $100 a month for my son, see if he can learn something. So I started, and that's how I got into business. And make a long story short, I taught myself fiber optics. I taught myself business. I had a friend who, I had a computer in those days, it was a K-Pro 10. It looked like a suitcase. It was like one of these massive things. It was called 10 because it had a 10 megabyte hard drive back in 1982. And I had a friend who later became a big guy at Microsoft who was playing with a program called VisiCalc, which was the first spreadsheet. And I started going to these meetings with these guys talking about fiber optics, and it was really fun because I had a little bit of knowledge, and that was enough, okay, because nobody knew shit. Okay? They didn't know anything. So, and if somebody started asking me tough questions, I would hide behind the Hebrew. I'd say, wait, Anila Mavin, I don't understand, and I would go quickly write that down, and I'd call my dad at midnight and say, Dad, what does this thing mean exactly? So I taught myself fiber, and then I kept on getting asked by these guys who were buying little contract research deals from my dad. I said, when are you going to build a factory? When are you going to go take this technology and do something here in Israel with it? And I said, I don't know, soon, we'll be building a factory soon. And I went and got a couple of books on how to write a business plan. Make a long story short, I went to my friend with VisiCalc, and we built a spreadsheet about how much it would cost to build the factory. And then I raised $600,000 from an Israeli company because there was no venture capital. This was in 1985 when we got the check. There simply had not been a single Israeli venture capital fund. The first one was established in 1986. And I got money from a company called ECI, which was Electronics Corporation of Israel, and they gave us $600,000. They bought about 30% of the company. And the chairman, I told you I wouldn't move, but I have to move here to just get some water. The chairman said, okay, now that you've raised this money, you must go back to where your father is in California and help him build the business. And I had just gotten married with my wife, who also came from America, and I said, Jane, we're John and Jane, I said, Jane, we're getting ready to go to America. Great news. She said, you're crazy. I moved here. I don't want to go to America. Okay, so I said, Jane, it's only going to take a year. We're going to work there. We're going to come back to Israel. We're going to build a factory. It's all going to be fine. Make a long story short, it took 6 years. Okay, sometimes entrepreneurs have to stretch the truth just a bit. And in those 6 years, built a real business with my dad. And the business became a leading company in fiber optic communications. We had about 150 people, $10 million of annual sales, and then we sold it to Amoco, which was later bought by British Petroleum. We have nothing to do with the oil spill, but had my first exit. And took my wife, and we now had 3 boys, and in 1991 came back to Israel, okay, after 6 years in Santa Monica. And actually, a couple months before going back to Israel, I went for a vacation where I met a very wealthy gentleman at the hotel. Sometimes your networking happens in strange places. And he said, well, what are you doing with your life? I said, well, I just sold a company to Amoco, and I don't really know yet, and I'm going to move back to Israel. He goes, Israel, they have some interesting technology over there. Why don't you look for some deals for me? I said, look for deals? He goes, yeah, I'm an investor. I like to invest in things. And make a long story short, I went back, and literally the very first day that I was in the country, he was staying in the country at the King David Hotel. I arranged a meeting with 2 little companies, and he liked them both. And he said, I want to invest in both of these companies. You'll handle my investments in them. And that's how I started my career as an investor. And these were small investments, a couple $100,000. The first one turned out to be a great company. It was later became OptiBase, was a pioneer in MPEG video compression, both encoding and decoding. And because turned out that the fiber business I built was a video business. I've always had video technologies in my background, in addition to that history. And but the guy who was an investor went a little wild, and he basically, after a couple of months, said, you know, I can't deal with these Israelis. They're too difficult. They're always asking and arguing. Get me out of there. So I literally found somebody else to take the investment. Big mistake for that guy, because he would have made, you know, probably over 100 times his money. And I had this other company which he wanted to invest in, which we hadn't finished yet. And he said, you take it. And I said, what do you mean I take it? He goes, you got some money. You made money on selling this company. It's just a couple $100,000. You get some other friends. You do it. So I did that company. And there were 5 guys there. And I really loved the company, except that these guys couldn't build the business. They were technology guys. So I ended up putting together investment and ended up going and running their marketing and sales. And this company became called Accent Software. It got to about a $450 million market cap after we took it public on NASDAQ. And then, about 3 years later, I decided I could be a venture capitalist, because I had built a fiber optic communications company, and now I built a software company. So I started with $2 million of money, which I raised from friends. Said, look, I've made successful companies happen. Give us some money. And we started raising more and more and more. This was in 1994, and I ultimately raised about $262 million, which I managed in 4 different funds. Our investors included the largest insurance company here in Europe, AXA, Deutsche Bank, UBS Capital, the Wellcome Trust of the UK, the California State Pension Fund, MIT Endowment, I should say that here because of MIT, and a bunch of other very reputable investors that every time they made decisions to put money with me, I was very scared. Because I said, I don't have an MBA, I don't have a technology degree, but there's a phrase in Hebrew which is untranslatable called chutzpah, okay, which means daring, okay? That I had. I had the ability to take risks. So we backed 60 different companies, as we were called Israel Seed Partners, and made seed investments in 60 companies. Some of them became very big companies. We were the seed investors in a company called Shopping.com, where 2 guys walked in with an idea which we didn't like, and we changed the idea, gave them $1 million at a $2 million valuation, and that became a company which we sold for $640 million to eBay after a Goldman Sachs IPO, backed Cyota, which was bought for $160 million, backed Compugen, which is today the leader in bioinformatics, traded on NASDAQ, and a whole host of others, which you can look at my bio and see that. And about 4 years ago, decided I wanted to go back to my roots after 11 years of running venture capital, and I'm now the CEO of a new software startup in the mobile space called Vringo, which I just took public on Amex, New York Stock Exchange, less than 2 weeks ago. It was an IPO in a very difficult climate, and now I feel like a guy who just climbed over a Himalayan mountain, and I'm looking at Everest, okay, because I've now got to go, really build this company. So that's who I am, okay? That's my story. A lot of luck, okay, an incredible amount of luck, and a little bit of daring, and maybe even less brains. What do you need to do to make a successful business happen, okay, as an entrepreneur? What do I look for when I'm an investor, or what do I advise people? First thing is make sure you have a team. Now that sounds like a stupid piece of obvious advice, right? Everyone needs a team. But most people don't understand that deeply when they start a company. That an investor is looking at you and he's saying, okay, do you have the ability to convince this guy to leave his job or to work nights? Because if you can't, if you say, well, I'm by myself and I can't start this thing until I get some money, I'm not interested. Okay? Because if you can't convince people to join you in your adventure, then forget it. I'm not putting money behind that adventure. So the team is really a critical component of it. But in addition to your friend, you need a mentor. Okay? And if you haven't found, before you come to me as an investor, somebody who's going to be your teacher, your rabbi, your priest, okay, whatever he's going to be, somebody who's going to your professor, okay, but more than just teaching, someone who's going to live with you and advise you. If you haven't already got that guy, then again, I'm skeptical about your ability to build a successful business. So the first thing is before you even talk about money, get your team together and make sure it's a good team. Make sure the team obviously is complementary. You want at least one talker, okay, and you want, more than one doer, okay, and you probably, want some kind of a technology base. It's very, very hard. Maybe back in 1999, you could build pets.com, okay, with just an idea and no technology. Today, without the technology, it's not going to happen, okay, in most cases. The second thing you need to worry about is thinking big rather than thinking big, what I call thinking big and starting small. I think many people don't realize that the business idea they've got is too small. Okay, is simply, it's a feature, not a company. That's a, very classic VC. VCs see 100 deals for every deal they invest. So understand that your chances when you're walking into a real venture capitalist is basically 1% at best. Okay, you don't have great chances. And we have hundreds of standard turndowns. This is a feature, it's not a company. Okay, this is you don't have enough traction. There's a million reasons. But I think the most important thing is to really attack a big market. If you have figured out a market which is going to be huge, I think that's where you want to play. Now, some people say, no, big markets, competition. You have to worry about competition, and who am I? I don't worry about competition. In my school of the VC, I could give a shit. I don't care about competition. Okay? People say, well, Microsoft is going to do it, or Google's going to do it, or Apple's going to do it. Okay, I really think that's the last thing you need to worry about. You need to find a big, big market, because big markets launch and rise with a lot of ships on it. Okay? And I think that if the biggest problem is just having a small idea which is just going to be a little, because remember, the venture business is not about getting 2 times my money or 3 times my money. The venture business is about a Google. The venture business is about a Yahoo, about a shopping.com. You need 100 times return. And you're not getting 100 times return unless you get a really big business at the end of the day. So, and by the way, that doesn't mean that it doesn't make a good little small business for yourself. Okay, there are many small businesses that are attacking very little markets and grow incrementally, just you're not going to get venture capital money, generally. You're not going to get reputable venture capital money. In other words, and that might mean that you have to think as an entrepreneur what your strategy is. Right? If this is a small business, something which is going to grow, which has a maximum, in other words, one of the things you have to ask yourself is, what do I need to show a VC in terms of sales? I cannot tell you how many guys used to come into our office. They finally figured it out in Israel. They would show me this business plan. They would waste our time. We never usually give them meetings. And they would have projections showing that in 5 years, they have $6 million or euros of sales. I said, $6 million? That's what you're showing me on your projections? Now, reality, by the way, it's not so bad. It's, that's, if you can build a business to get to $5 or $6 million in 5 years, great. But if you're showing me this on paper, the first thing I am doing is discounting. Okay, I don't believe you. Okay, it's not 6 million, it's going to be $500,000, and it's just too small. So, if you're not showing that your business is going to be, each country is different, but certainly in Israel, if you're not showing a $25 or $50 million, at least in a couple of years, we're just not interested. Okay? Now, not everyone gets there, and most people never get there in time. It takes much longer to build businesses than you think. Much, much longer. Okay? I mean, in the old days, we had one company we invested in called Tradium, which was a B2B exchange company. And we gave them also $1 million at a $3 million valuation. And within 6 months, in 1999, we invested. In the year 2000, we sold it for $450 million. Okay, it went from $3 million to $450 in 6 months. Is that ever going to happen again? No. Okay, those times are over. Okay, that was the bubble. That was, write books about it, dream about it, fantasize about it. It ain't happening again. Okay, it's not coming back. Okay, to build a big business takes years of hard work. So dream big, put it on the paper, but work small. Okay, in other words, there's a paradox here. On the one hand, you have to really put big blue sky up there. But on the other hand, your first steps have to be very, very concrete. Okay, and the first step, after you've got your team, even before you get your money, by the way, and is that you're going to have to get a partner or a customer. If you haven't found some kind of a corporation or a company or somebody who's real, who's willing to work with you before you come to me for money, again, you're missing the checkbox, right? You need to have a good team, you need to have a good mentor, and you need to have a first customer. And if you can't get to the first customer, you do what's bootstrapping. Do what my dad did. You find money, you borrow it from your family. Okay, you put your own money in there. Because if you don't have the first customer, then I don't believe it. Now, what we do with companies in Israel is that guy needs a video ringtone. He needs what we do in Israel is guys would come in with their idea, and the first thing we do is we get on a plane and we go to see a customer, a real customer, because I can't decide myself whether or not this software for Salesforce automation is going to do it. Okay, and I want to talk to a company, a big company, and I really respect the fact that you found somebody who says, hey, this technology works, it's there, it's validated. Getting a customer is very, very important. I'm going to say something else. Business plans are overrated. Okay, I cannot tell you how many entrepreneurs become neurotic, some dare say psychotic, over the business plan. I mean, take all of your term papers and put them all into one, and I got to write a business plan. It's a horrible thing. It's a scary thing. Okay? The business plan ain't the end of the world. Okay? Today, in my opinion, in Silicon Valley, probably most companies get funded off of a PowerPoint. Okay? Business plans are just so 1980s. Okay? They're simply not, part of our reality today. So if someone tells you you've got to go spend, a bunch of money and hire a consultant, and you've got to write a 200-page, marketing survey and analysis. Bullshit. Okay, it's just not true. Okay, now again, it could be different in this country. Okay, I don't know the Portuguese, environment and culture is very important. Okay, but certainly in Silicon Valley and Israel, business plans are not critical. Okay, a good presentation, 20 really good slides that rock, that show that you know how to communicate and to crystallize the idea, that's more valuable, in my opinion. You got to due diligence your investor. Okay, everyone knows the word due diligence, right? Which is what investors do on the company, right? We ask, not only who your teachers were and your grades, but where do I find your kindergarten teacher? Okay, in other words, that's called diligence, right? You want to, and by the way, it's not overrated. As a venture capitalist, the one thing which you learn to do or die is make reference calls up and down the yin-yang. I mean, you'd be surprised how many people will come in, will pitch you on a deal, you'll think they look like good guys, and then you'll pick up the phone and even call some of their references, and they'll say, he's an asshole, he's a schmuck, okay, don't stay away from him. And you say, how could this guy be so stupid to give me this as a reference? Because he figured that people don't call references. Okay, because a lot of people are stupid and they don't call references. Okay, it's a lesson for business. Always call references and never rely only on the ones that they give you, right? Always find a way to get references that are on the side. But it's not just what the investor does for the entrepreneur. It's the entrepreneur should due diligence the investor. In other words, you better figure out who you are getting in bed with, because you are getting in bed, and it's full body contact and probably exchange of fluids. Okay, in other words, it is, and hopefully sweat. But it's intense. And if you getting in bed with the wrong investor, it's going to be bad. It's going to be ugly and smelly and wrong. Okay, so you better talk to other companies who got money from the investor. Now, some investors might go, oh, how dare you? When they ask you for references, you ask them for references, but better yet, do that before you even get into that meeting. Okay, first of all, how do you get the meeting? How do you get to the dream investor? If you can't figure out a way to get to somebody who knows somebody, then you're not going to make it as an entrepreneur. If you think that by sending in your business plan over the transom, right, where you just send it into, info@israelseed.com, you're going to get a call back, never happened. Never happened. Okay, you've got to find a way to get to Joe Blow through a friend. That's challenge number one. If you can't figure out somebody who knows Joe, okay, and owes you a favor, is going to say nice things about you, then it's not happening for you. You're not going to get the meeting. Okay, so that's also important. One of the things which people forget is to show personal commitment and involvement. You got to have skin in the game. One of the things that people ask always is, have you invested money? Have your family invested money? It's of huge importance. And especially if you come from a family with money and nobody's putting money into this thing, I'm running away. Tomorrow. But you say, well, it's my dad and I don't feel right and I'm a little nervous and I can't lose family money. And you got to have your skin and your family's skin in the game, especially if they've got, if you're poor, it's your poor. Okay? But if you have the means, you better be in the game. Otherwise, no one else is following. You gotta love risk. Okay? In other words, if you don't love risk, if you're a scaredy cat, then this isn't the game for you. If you're not a poker player, this is probably not the game for you. Okay? If you've never gambled in your life, I question to a certain degree. Okay, your sanity about getting into this business. This is not about sure things. Okay, in my opinion, yes, think about all the risks, except you've got to love risk. Okay, you've got to have a personal love affair with risk to make this work. And I'm not saying you should be a gambling alcoholic, that's not the point. But the point is your attitude towards risk has to be positive. Give it to me. Bring it on. Okay? Because people are going to tell you to your face, you're crazy. You're quitting your job for the startup. You're giving up your 4-week vacation. Okay, you live in France, are you a nut? Okay, people are going to tell you you're crazy, and you've got to believe in your guts that you're right, and you got to take the risk. Okay, and you got to be willing to accept failure, because every startup doesn't make it, right? If you're a venture capitalist and you back 20% successes, you're doing great. You're doing really great. So 80% are failing. And smart venture capitalists, by the way, like to invest in people who fail. Okay? Because they make great entrepreneurs. They make, better. Not all of them. Some of them are chronic. Okay, you see. But a lot of guys turned out to be home run hitters on their second time to bat. Right? In other words, you get it with, again, it's a baseball analogy, and I know I should be talking about soccer. Let's say, a lot of guys hit the goal, okay, on their third or fourth, kick to the thing. You don't get it every time, okay? And you've got to, you've definitely got to believe in yourself. I think last but not least, and I'm going to take some questions, is you've got to show the seed investor, and we're talking here mostly about seed money, I take it, what you're going to do with this money. And that this money is enough to get you to a critical milestone. The reason that most companies, small companies, die is they run out of money. Okay? I know it sounds stupid, but most people don't remember that. That's the primary failure mode, is you run out of money. The runway takes too long before your plane can take off. Okay, or the runway's too short. I'm sorry, your plane's crashing at the end of the runway. Okay, you've got to show that the $500,000 or $1 million or $2 million or even $100,000 is enough to get you to that next level where you're going to be able to raise additional money. And that's got to be really thought out well. Because, on one hand, you sit there and you say, okay, I need $1 million. Why? I need $1 million. I'll get farther on and then I'll raise more money. Except that you got to figure out that there's a milestone there. There's got to be some kind of value accretive event, okay, which gives you the ability to hopefully raise more money, not the same value, but at a higher value. And a note to the wise, the investors, is that you better realize every dollar you invest in a seed deal, you better reserve between $3 and $5 for follow-on, or you're going to get hammered. Because seed deals never get done with enough. No matter how much you try to say, I only need $1 million, you're going to get it wrong. Okay? Think about it, and you're going to get it wrong. And then what happens is you haven't got to that milestone, and you need more money. And the best place to get your more money is your existing investor. So if your existing investor gave you his last $1 million, that's not good. You didn't do your due diligence. Okay?
Exactly.
So anyway, these are just a few things. We can go on and on and on. I'm sure there's some questions. I'm delighted. I saw some of those posters out there that look great. Whoever's doing the wine project, I've got a friend who's a winemaker who can use it. Okay, you can call me and I'll get you a first customer maybe. Okay, but in any event, I'm delighted to be here. First time ever in Portugal. I'd like to come back and thank you for listening. I'll take your questions.